23?
Ya.
72?
Ya.
¿Qué hora es? Por debajo de
Hello and welcome. You're watching I24 News coming to you live from Tel Aviv. The headlines this hour. The IDF moves deeper into Rafah after taking complete control of the border between Gaza and Egypt. A cruise missile apparently fired from Iraq is shot down over the Golan Heights. And Sweden backs up a claim by the Mossad that Iran is using criminal gangs to attack Israeli, Jewish and Iranian dissident targets inside Europe. The group Palestinian Islamic Jihad has published a second video in as many days of hostage Sasha Trufanov. Sasha was seized from kibbutz near Oz on October 7th. It is unclear when the video was made. Well, for more on that, we can go to the south of Israel now. We're joined by our correspondent, Robert Swift. So, Rob, another hostage video just hours after the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, announced that Israel has concrete intel that the hostages are being held in Rafah.
That's right. Yoav Gallant made those comments when he was in conversation with his US counterpart Lloyd Austin, saying that as well as locating 20 tunnels in the Rafah area, they had concrete information about hostages. Now that has been followed a little time later by the release of this video by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and to a certain extent his friends and family will be able to take some comfort in that he looks relatively healthy for a hostage in the video, and it does appear that it may have been taken relatively recently due to some of the comments he made with regards to the recent closure of the Al Jazeera channel. But the fact that this video has been released, it once again demonstrates that, like Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad understand quite well the buttons that they can press within Israeli society, both in order to have an impact on the Israeli public, but just as importantly, in order to have an impact on Israeli politicians. They understand that there is increasing pressure within Israel by the hostages' families and many of their supporters, as well as other elements which are opposed to the Israeli government. As that pressure builds up, the organisations inside Gaza are attempting to leverage that to their own ends.
Meanwhile, Rob, sadly, another IDF soldier has been killed in Gaza, and we're getting more details, aren't we, about how the 3 soldiers in the Nahal brigades were killed. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this was 3 soldiers that were killed in the last couple of days. Their names were released yesterday, and it's now understood that they were killed as a result of an improvised explosive device. Now, it's understood that they were conducting a sweep of a complex of buildings from where anti-tank missile fire had originated. As they were doing that sweep, they discovered tunnels within the system, one of which, or at least one of which, appears to have been trapped and exploded, resulting in the 3 fatalities. This in itself is not, it's quite characteristics of the types of attacks that the IDF is experiencing, both now and throughout much of the war, with Hamas focusing on asymmetric attacks, standoff attacks. We've also seen recently from footage released by Hamas of them making a lot of use of mortar weapons, which they can attack the IDF whilst remaining at some distance, and also making use of machine guns to fire at Israeli helicopters, which may not be all that effective, but it does demonstrate the lengths that they're going to try and resist the IDF. But for the time being, they seem to be failing to hold back the IDF's advance through Rafah.
Rob, thank you very much. Robert Swift there down in the south of Israel. With me in the studio this hour, Professor Uzi Rabi is the director of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East Studies and a senior researcher at the Center for Iranian Studies, both at Tel Aviv University. Thank you very much for being with us, Professor. And let's talk about what's happening in Gaza. The long-awaited battle for Rafah is underway. Israel has taken control of the entire border crossing with Egypt. Just talk us through how that changes things in terms of strategy.
Well, in my opinion, this is kind of a strategic move, because it is well known that Rafah, and especially tunnels, which do cross actually the border from Egypt to Gaza and vice versa, this is part and parcel of the lifeline of Hamas. It goes without saying that this military initiative should have been done, because without it, Hamas cannot be uprooted.
You mean they should? The IDF should have started in the south?
Yeah, I think, it should have been done 4 months ago. I think that there was no reason whatsoever why actually the IDF decided actually to postpone the attack on Rafah. What I'm trying to say is that the very fact that these are the findings in Rafah say that this is definitely something that Israel should have done even before, but never actually. It is better to do that now than ever. And basically, I think that what we got here is kind of a move which is very, very important. Hamas is not going actually to give up. But if you ask me, this is the last formal stronghold of Hamas, with the brigade there, with the headquarters. I hope and pray that there would be at least part of the hostages that can be found there, but there is no actually guarantee for that. There is kind of a job in the north, which is Jabalia, in the center when it comes to the other refugee camps and cities, and it would take time. But listen, this is basically the nature of such war against a terrorist group like Hamas. And I think that what we do see here is something that would provide Israel with some pressure levers, to use when it comes to the military angle and the political or negotiation stuff one.
Okay, all right, stay with us, Uzi, because Egypt has denied Israel's claim that it found 20 tunnels leading from Rafah to Egyptian territory, and relations between the two countries have come under severe strain over the operation there. And earlier this week, 2 Egyptian soldiers were killed in a rare exchange of fire with Israeli troops. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Heba El-Qudsi, Washington Bureau Chief at the Al-Ashaq Al-Awsat newspaper. Thank you very much for being with us, Heba. Good to see you again. And there seems to be a bit of a dispute about what is reality here. Are there or are there not Hamas tunnels running into Egypt from Rafah?
They used to have tunnels back several years ago between the Egyptian side and Rafah side. But if you go back to the uprising against President Mubarak in 2011, a lot of Hamas militants were able to cross this border through the tunnels and open the prisons and held the uprising against President Mubarak. At that time, the Egyptian government was keen to destroy all these tunnels, and they announced that they have destroyed more than 7,000, 8,000 tunnels since that uprising in 2011. So Egypt is keen to prevent any usage of these tunnels between Rafah and Sinai. On the other hand, these clashes, it was a rare clash between the Israeli soldier and the Egyptian soldier that caused the death of 2 soldiers, will raise a lot of risk for both sides. This is the chances of miscalculation are very high, and the Egyptian government is trying to eliminate all kinds of a pro-Palestinian demonstration to turn into another uprising, and the chances of another clashes between the two sides is very high. That's why the American sides are very concerned about this kind of tension that was raised during the past few days. And on the other side, they are the White House and the Security Council is at the White House are considering a visit to Egypt next week to see how to put some kind of a plan for controlling
there's even
between Egypt and Israel.
Yes, that's right. And there's even talk, isn't there, about European officials coming to help monitor the border between Gaza and Egypt. But how would that work, Hiba, if Hamas is not defeated?
They want to make sure that these tunnels that they allege that Israel is saying used by Hamas to smuggle weapons or to smuggle people into Sinai is not used, and to verify that Egypt is doing all its best to provide humanitarian aid and prevent any smuggling through these tunnels. So having parties from the US and the European Union, that will ease a little bit the tension between Israel and Egypt, and will verify that Israel is fighting Hamas, is fighting its military, but at the same time is not raising the tension with Egypt, because Egypt is really worried and looking with deep suspension of this offensive operation in Rafah. And the accident that happened.
Yes, quite. Well, did Egypt expect the IDF to take control of the border so quickly? Was it caught by surprise?
Actually, what I heard that the Israeli side informed the Egyptian side just few hours before taking over the border. And that's what raised a lot of tension and a lot of fear at the Egyptian side that this accident that happened few days ago could happen again, and the control of the pro-Palestinian demonstration inside Egypt can spread, and that fight can split from the border into Sinai. These are really dangerous signs and really dangerous fears that that could tackle the Egyptian security.
So a lot of tension on both sides. Hiba, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it. Hiba,
thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And Professor Uzi Rabi is with me in the studio.
Thank you.
So the real risk of a confrontation still between Israel and Egypt.
Well, it is of no surprise to me that the Egyptians denied the very existence of these tunnels, because this is highly embarrassing for them. Highly embarrassing. But having said that, I would say that in the times of Mohammed Morsi, actually, a president which was nominated, in Egypt in 2013, I mean, there was sort of, this whole industry of smuggling came to full flower. And that was no surprise, because he was basically a guy from the Muslim Brothers. Sisi, the next president, tried actually just to minimize that. But
it's President Sisi doing the best he can in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, but listen, I mean, he turned a blind eye at a certain stage to what happened there. And basically, we know now that Hamas was to bolster its stance and position through the tunnels, and this is something that has to be reckoned with. Having said that, we should definitely talk to Egypt and the United States there must be kind of an extensive talk about the compromise that should be reached when it comes to Philadelphia corridor. But here is the thing. Israel can never let anybody else take care of its immediate security needs, which means that what Israel did now is something to stay on there. Kind of a military presence all along the border from the Palestinian Gazan side. We cannot actually...
Even if that brings substantial international pressure?
It won't. I mean, if Israel would be wise, it should come up with some compromise when it comes to the civilian life in Gaza, but it cannot compromise actually on that, because that would create kind of an introductory remark to another 7th of October atrocities.
Okay, Professor Rabi, for now, thank you. Well, the IDF shot down a cruise missile that was most likely fired from Iraq earlier today. It came down over the Golan Heights. There's been no claim of responsibility from the Iranian-backed militias responsible for previous such attacks that have mostly targeted Israel's Red Sea city of Eilat. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Michael P. Pregent, US Army veteran who served for many years in Iraq. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Michael. And after quieting down for a little while, are we now seeing a sign that these Iranian-backed militias in Iraq are ready and prepared to step up direct attacks on Israel?
Thanks for having me. They've wanted to do this for a long time. Qasem Soleimani put the land bridge in place in Iraq to run through Syria into Lebanon and eventually to threaten the entire Levant to include Israel. So what we're seeing now is Qasem Soleimani's plan. Of course, he was killed on January 20th of 2020, January 2nd of 2020. And we're seeing those militias now use advanced munitions. This is a cruise missile. This would be the third such launch since May 5th by one of these Iranian-backed militias. When I say Iranian-backed, it's the IRGC created the militia, trained the militia, funded the militia, and directs the militia to conduct attacks. This could either be one of their militias, or it could actually be Iran having their advisors with these militias launching these cruise missiles, teaching them how to do this. So this is significant. What's more significant is it's technically a U.S. ally, the Iraqi government. Yet there are no calls by the Biden administration to ask Baghdad to do anything about these militias, because everybody knows Baghdad won't do anything about these militias because they actually support them.
Okay, well, I mean, there were some signs, weren't there, that the Iranians were pulling their assets out of Syria because they were concerned about strikes by Israel. Are they going to focus their attentions more on Iraq now, and how should Israel and indeed the United States respond?
Well, Israel has conducted airstrikes inside of Iraq against these militias in the past, even when it conducted its response to the Iranian cruise missile attacks, ballistic missile attacks, and drone attacks against Israel. Israel hit some of these Iraqi militias south of Baghdad. When Iran says it's moving its militias from Syria into Iraq, they're simply moving them back to the Abu Kamal crossing, which is the Iraqi-Syrian border, and also the Al Tanaf crossing, which is again is the Iraqi-Syrian border. They believe that if they are in Iraq, the U.S. may pressure Israel not to conduct strikes inside of Iraq. But I will tell you that even when Qasem Soleimani was alive, Israel conducted attacks inside of Iraq. Iraqis knew about it and had no problem as long as they were attacking Shia militias tied to Iran.
I've been hearing from Iraqi Kurds and the autonomous region of Kurdistan in Iraq. They're saying they feel very let down by the Americans, by the US government, and they, for their own protection, have been having to turn more towards Iran. Just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's unfortunate, right? I was an embedded advisor with the Peshmerga in 2005, and they were the best fighting force on the ground. They're a natural U.S. ally. They're actually an Israeli ally. And we worked with them. They're the most capable fighting force inside of Iraq, and we have pushed them towards Iran for protection. We pushed them towards Istanbul also for protection. So we have a traditional ally now worried about Iran, courting Iran, and now also working with Erdogan, who has taken a very anti-Israel position and has also been leaning more towards Tehran in recent years. So with these recent examples of betrayal, whether it be the Kurds in northern Iraq or the Kurds inside of northern Syria, it's hard for the U.S. to shore up confidence in our allies that we have their back, that we have the resolve that's needed. And no country knows that more right now than Israel, as it's facing this post-October 7th world where the U.S. is demanding Israel do the impossible. Go after Hamas without killing a single civilian that Hamas is hiding behind. And that is something that is completely unacceptable from this administration to ask that, because in our actions inside of Iraq, inside of Syria, we were never held to that standard. In Iraq, we were at 1 ISIS fighter to 10 Iraqi civilians. That was the normal casualty rate. And the Iraqi government that was backed by Iran had no problem as long as those civilians were Sunni, as long as those civilians were Sunni Iraqis.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask you about comparisons with Iraq, because there have been both favourably and unfavourably in terms of the civilian death toll. I mean, do you see similarities with how Israel is fighting Hamas in Gaza and how the US campaigned to oust Saddam Hussein in Iraq?
I just came back from Israel and had the opportunity to talk to some forces that were conducting these targeted strikes based on intelligence, using the proper munitions to go after 2 individuals, as opposed to what the U.S. did during the ISIS campaign. We have to remember, the ISIS campaign started under the Obama-Biden administration, an administration that did not want to see a single U.S. death. And because of that, we basically partnered with Iran's militias on the ground in Iraq. And I'll tell you, as a former intel officer that spent 5 years inside of Iraq, both in uniform and out of uniform, that the Iraqis would basically tell us, everyone over there is a terrorist, just destroy that city. And in the ISIS campaign, we actually did that. So we would drop a JDAM. A JDAM is a 2,000-pound bomb. This is the bomb that supposedly was used in Rafah that was never used in this recent attack days ago. It was a small munition that the IDF used, a 34-gram or kilogram munition. We dropped 2,000-pound bombs in a crowded, dense urban population to take out an ISIS sniper because you wanted to avoid U.S. casualties.
Wow.
During the last phase of the ISIS campaign, this is important, there were 600 ISIS fighters inside of the old town of Mosul. And we estimated that the civilian numbers there were 60,000. That small town was cordoned off where nobody could get out. And the Iraqi government said, kill everything that moves. And we dropped bombs in there, and that civilian to combatant ratio is 1 ISIS fighter to 60 civilians. And I testified about that in U.S. Congress during the ISIS campaign when Trump was president. So that is, we were asking Israel to do the impossible. The current combatant to civilian death is 1.4 combatants to 1 civilian. That's unheard of. And Israel's not getting the credit they deserve. And again, they're being asked to do the impossible. Don't kill any civilians. Well, if you translate that, it means don't target Hamas, because that's where they hide. They hide amongst the civilians and often keep them there by gunpoint.
Well, Michael President, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Professor Ravi, just to pick up on what we were talking about there, let's start perhaps with the militias in Iraq, another worrying development for Israel.
Yeah, first of all, actually, in my opinion, the culprit behind this missile attack on Golan Heights is what they call actually the Islamic resistance in Iraq. It is part and parcel of kind of an umbrella organizations of Iranian-backed Shi'i militias. It is called in Arabic al-Hashad al-Sha'bi, which is the popular gathering. They had been there actually before, and this is part and parcel of the Iranian orchestra. Basically, it has 2 aims. It aims at 2 destinations. The first of which is what we mentioned, actually attack Israel from far away. There is a dialogue between Iraq and Yemen, Houthis and Hashd Sha'bi, because these are the let's say the back front of the Iranian machinery, and they basically hit Israel. At the same time, and that was mentioned actually in this interview, they do attack American forces there, especially when it comes to Tanaf, when it comes to Abu Kemal. This is the crossing border.
Three American
and they killed three
troops,
Americans, and the Americans
in
retaliated. So, in my opinion, the 7th of October provided Iran with kind of a golden opportunity for the first time to tie up the loose ends. All these proxies are becoming part and parcel of kind of a theater where Iran actually cunningly and skillfully, I dare say,
and efforts to deter them are simply not working. Just a word on the comparisons that you heard there between the war in Gaza and the war in Iraq.
That is something that should be voiced by Israel day and night, time and again. And if he had a testimony of that, I would actually take it and cite it and use it, because when it comes to that city in Iraq where ISIS was located, it was 1 to 60 citizens, one ISIS fighter against 60 citizens. What you can do, actually, this is kind of a world where
and France and the UK and all the European
truth is not there. I mean, we used to say that this is a post-truth era. And let me just remind you, Iran is the initiator of the problems in the Middle East. So once again, when the United States do talk about it the day after, and I think that it should be there, we would like to have kind of a solution or kind of a saying about who is going to take care of the main problem, which is Iran, not necessarily the symptoms only. And I do hope that the Americans would change something here when it comes to their attitude towards Iran. I don't count on the Europeans and for that matter, but the Americans should know that without actually dealing with Iran, nothing will be sold out in the Middle East.
Well, we'll talk about that after the break, because another big power is moving into the region, of course, and that is China. And up next, China's President Xi has called for a peace conference for Gaza. We'll talk about Beijing's influence in the region after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. China's President Xi Jinping has called for a peace conference for Gaza and has reiterated his support for the creation of a Palestinian state. Delegations from 22 Arab states are convening in Beijing, among them Egypt's President Sisi, Emirati President bin Zayed and Tunisia's President Sayed. It's China's latest attempt at deepening its influence in the region, as our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran explains.
With the war raging in the Middle East, China is flexing its diplomatic influence in the region. Speaking at the China-Arab States Cooperation Forum in Beijing on Thursday, Chinese President Xi Jinping called for a peace conference in the Middle East.
Since last October, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has escalated drastically, throwing people into immense suffering. War should not continue indefinitely. Justice should not be absent forever.
Addressing the leaders of Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Tunisia, along with some foreign ministers from Arab League nations, Xi reiterated China's support for the two-state solution.
China firmly supports the establishment of an independent state of Palestine that enjoys full sovereignty based on the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. It supports Palestine's full membership in the UN and supports a more broad-based, authoritative, and effective international peace conference.
China wants to present itself as an alternative to the West and a more credible partner to the region. And it hopes to achieve that by funding large infrastructure projects and deepening trade. Diplomatically, China surprised everyone last year when 3 months after the last forum, it brokered an agreement to restore diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, who was absent from this year's summit.
China and Arab countries enjoy traditional friendship and are strategic partners with mutual trust. In the first China-Arab State Summit in 2022, the two sides agreed to build a China-Arab community with a shared future in the new era. China-Arab relations have entered a new era of deepening and comprehensive development.
But critics say these summits only highlight the limits of Chinese influence in the Middle East, not its strengths. China continues to embolden Iran's destabilizing behavior, from illicit oil purchases to defending last month's missile and drone attack on Israel. Beijing hosts Hamas leaders and protects only its own vessels against Houthi threats at sea. All the while, it hopes to further challenge the U.S. and Russia's influence in the region.
Well, with us now, Grant Rumley is Senior Fellow and Director at the Glazer Programme on Great Power Competition and the Middle East. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. And are we seeing a case of China moving in where the United States is inevitably moving out?
I think what we're seeing is China try to position itself in that way. Look, a lot of China's actions in the region are meant to be symbolic. Meant to sort of offer a different political perspective, a different diplomatic sounding board for countries in the region. And that's, one of the uses that many countries in the region have seen in this relationship with China. And so, first and foremost, there's always an economic component to what China is doing in the region, and there's always an economic incentive for these countries to participate in it. Now, as we're, 6 months and beyond into this war, there's the added benefit for a lot of countries in the region to sort of use this trip to broadcast, some of their discontent with Israel, with the U.S., with how this war has played out. And so these summits in China are useful for them in that regard.
This is the first time, I think, that the United Arab Emirates has taken part in this particular forum. What has changed for the UAE? Why are they moving closer to China?
I think it's the first time the head of state has participated in it. These forums go back to 2004 when they were actually established in Egypt when then President Hu Jintao visited. Before 2022, they were held at the sort of the foreign minister level. It was only a couple of years ago when Xi Jinping went to Saudi Arabia that it was sort of elevated up to the heads of state level. And notably, 2 years ago, the head of the UAE did not attend because, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was hosting it. And so there was a little bit of deconfliction on that front. And so in this go around, MBZ is now in China representing the UAE. But I think, we've seen Gulf ties in particular with China deepen, sort of beyond just the energy to other aspects of the commercial and even some of the security cooperation as well. And so
I think there's definitely an incentive for him to go there and see about advancing this relationship.
Is China spinning the war in Gaza to its advantage?
I think they're certainly trying. What's notable is that they've departed a little bit from their previous approaches to the Israeli-Hamas conflict. Whenever things had sort of sprouted up in Gaza before, China was very careful in its language and its rhetoric to not offend either Israel or the broader Arab world. They tried to find a very calibrated language that was, sort of generic, pro two states, pro peace, pro ceasefire. In this current round, they've been largely dismissive of Hamas's attacks on October 7th and largely critical of Israel, saying Israel's actions have gone beyond the scope of self-defense, all of which, I think has basically torched parts of the relationship with Israel out of some type of calculation to appeal to the broader Arab world, the broader sort of global South sentiment. But that to me is a little bit of an empty strategy. I'm not certain what it gains them in the long run beyond sort of lip service and favor from some of the Arab world.
And meanwhile, what China has managed to gain is a very successful strategy that it's built on a kind of an alternative global economy, hasn't it? Because it's managed to pick up all the countries that are suffering from US sanctions, Iran, Venezuela, Iran, of course, and managing to create this alternative economy. Has the US kind of been caught off guard? Did it not see that unintended consequence?
Well, certainly, the perils of relying on sanctions as a primary tool of statecraft is that over time, other countries that are getting sanctioned will look for ways to evade sanctions. And so, you have seen sanctions being applied against other partners of China in the past, most notably Russia and Iran. And so it almost is a logical conclusion that China would become sort of a hub of evading these sanctions. It's something we have to now bake into our future considerations when we're looking at competing and countering China's influence, in particular in the Middle East, where some of these activities are taking place, as you noted.
Grant Ramley, great to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Professor Uzi Rabi from Tel Aviv University is with us in the studio. So what do you think? Do you think China has a long-term strategy for the region? Is it just playing the long game?
I'm pretty sure about that. But what I see here is, when it comes to rhetoric, they are coming up with even-handed policy. I mean, they won't say too much about that. They're swallowing up, actually, economic slices here and there. What they have is the Belt and Road strategy. They can be found everywhere, but when it comes to nitty-gritty details about this conflict, that conflict, they wouldn't take kind of I would say, a staunch position, and they would be even more even-handed. I think, though, that they do invest in Iran and Russia, because, in my opinion, what the 7th of October actually provided us is kind of a new architecture, geopolitically speaking, not only in the Middle East when it comes to Iran and company, and on the other side, the Arab Sunni states. If you're going to go onto the globe, you would broaden up each one of those axes, the first of which Iran and company with Russia, with China. This is becoming kind of a grand calculus. In my opinion, this is why the United States is that worried. This is why the United States is adamant in its bid to create kind of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia and create kind of a counterbalance to the growing influence of China, which we have to admit actually has managed to capitalize on the American pale performance in the recent decade in the Middle East.
All right, Uzi, for now, thank you. Well, Sweden has backed up a claim by Israel's Mossad agency that Iran is using criminal gangs to attack Jewish, Israeli and Iranian dissident targets in Europe. The Mossad began an investigation after an explosive device was found inside the grounds of the Israeli embassy in Stockholm back in January. The leader of a Swedish crime gang, Rawah Majid, known as the Kurdish Fox, had been working with Iran for months, according to the Mossad. He was recruited by Iranian agents after he fled to Iran from Turkey. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Iranian human rights activist Vahid Beheshti. Good to see you again, Vahid. And you've been warning about this, haven't you, for a long time now. Is this a sign European authorities are finally beginning to take the threat from Iran inside their own countries more seriously?
Thank you for having me here, Laura, because they don't have any other choice than taking the threat seriously, because this is an existential threat to their civilizations, their cultures, their values. And this is why we have been camped in front of UK Foreign Office for 463 days today. This is why I came to Israel to warn the Israeli ministers. And I'm really glad, I'm really happy Israel for the first time standing strong against these terrorists and doing the right job. And this is why I went to Washington, D.C. and warned the different offices in there about this existential threat. This is not the result of last year and 2 years and 3 years before. This is the result of 35 years at least constant work of Iranian regime on our societies. And this is just a drop of the ocean. They invest billions of dollars on this, and employing criminal gangs is just one of their tactics in order to attack our values, our societies. Look at the university campuses, what they are doing in university campuses. And this is what I have warned. I said this is not a student movement. This is Marxist Islamist alliance movement, which is coming to Europe. You are witnessing in some of the universities in UK, we are start witnessing it. For example, this international orchestrated international campaign for past 3 days against Israel since the start going to Rafah. This is I can see the fingerprint of Iranian regime everywhere.
Are you talking about the famous meme, "All eyes on Rafah"?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I wrote on my Twitter, I said I can see the fingerprint of Iranian regime everywhere on this international campaign, which is being orchestrated by them. And this is just another tactic of them. Of course, we are very behind when it comes to PR work. Thanks to you guys in I-24, you're doing great job, but this is not enough compared to them. They invest billions of billions for years for these days. And of course, after October the 7th, they activated their cells in these gangs. For example, what happened in Germany?
Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think that is, Vahid? Because I know in the UK media they did cover a story when there was an attempted assassination of journalists working at Iran International. Other than that, you see very little about Iran's operations in these countries. And as we keep hearing, as Salman Rushdie, the author who's been attacked by Iran for decades, warned, this is everywhere now in Europe. This is a real threat.
Look, Laura, it's too late, because this is like a branch of one tree which is gone everywhere. Because, and I said it's too late. They are everywhere. Look at the universities. Look at the different religious centers they have. Look at their lobbies. Look at their businesses that they have here. Look at their charities they have. And this is my solution when I came to Israel, to DC, and here, constantly talking to MPs, to our leaders here. I said, you have to go for the root of this cropped tree, which is the regime inside of Iran. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to counter all these different branches in all different countries in Europe and in America. They've been working for so long, and we were in deep coma, unfortunately, in West. And they are still not willing to see this serious threat against their values and their culture and their civilizations.
Vahid, thank you very much indeed. We'll leave it there. Vahid Beheshti, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, a Kurdish doctor who spent weeks treating the wounded in hospitals in Gaza has given an interview to the Kurdish news network Rudo about his experience there. Take a listen.
والله حماس طبعا وكو ڕێی خراوەیەکی سیاسی سەربازی پێویستی بەوە هەیە کەەوە استقلالی هەموو شوێنێ بکە بۆ مانەوە و جێگەی خواتی خۆیان تەمەن بەداخۆم کەم قسەیەکەم بە چاوی خۆمیەوە لە خەستەخانەکانە مەسەرەن بەکارێنێ بۆ ساردنەوەی سەرکردەکانی حەماس بێت
یعنی ئەوەی کە ئیسرائیل لێ ڕاستە سەرکردەکانی حەماس نەخۆشخانەکان وەک قەڵغانی مرۆیی بەکارێنن بۆ خۆیان
باڵێ بە چاوی خۆم بینیم ئەو شتەکان.
That was Dr. Bakhtiyar Baram. He works with the Norwegian Association, and there in that interview he said he saw with his own eyes how Hamas operatives hide in hospitals in Gaza. He also said that civilians are suffering terribly and are being exploited by Gazan mafias. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Entifad Kambar. He's the president of the Kurdish Protection Action Committee and the former spokesman for the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Good to see you again, Entifad. And a wide-ranging interview there. Dr. Baram spoke, didn't he, about how he tried to help the people in Gaza. He really wanted to help people and relieve their suffering, but his Kurdish surname was a bit of a problem for him. Why the animosity?
Well, I tell you one thing, Laura. I myself went and lived through this. As an Iraqi who came to the United States young in 1990, I worked in the Iraqi opposition against Saddam. And I was a PhD student, a doctorate student at Georgia Tech, Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. And the Palestinian students were fighting with me, trying to intimidate me because I'm circulating a newspaper, Iraqi opposition newspaper, against Saddam. And when I asked them, and they said the Shia and the Kurds who are being killed by Saddam by chemical weapons deserve to die because they are against Saddam. So I said, how could you ask for your rights when you wish for innocent Shia collectively and innocent Kurds collectively to be killed? Unfortunately, in the Middle East or in the Arab world, there is what I call it a Palestinian superiority. It's like they hold they are the moral police for what we can think in our countries. So I'm supposed to accept Saddam jailing me and torturing me and killing my country and my people because I have to be nice to the Palestinians because Saddam shot 39 missiles on Israel. I have a friend who's here in Washington, who's a Sudani from Darfur. He told me the Janjaweed, which is an ISIS Arab militia, killing thousands and tens of thousands of innocent Africans in Darfur. And South Africa, which sued Israel in the ICC, refused to participate or support an African force to protect the innocent tribes in Darfur. So this double standard hypocrisy of holding Israel accountable for every single detail while giving the Palestinians a free hand to say and do whatever they want, it's not only not good for the world, it's not good for the Palestinians themselves, because the Palestinians cannot remember now what are their rights and what are their limits and what they should fight for.
Well, I mean, how do you explain this, Entifad? Why isn't there more sympathy among the Palestinians for the much longer Kurdish struggle for independence, given their own history? And in fact, Khalid Mishal, the former Hamas leader, he spoke directly about Kurdistan a couple of years ago. He was very dismissive. He said, look, what can I say? Kurdistan is not a real liberation struggle. They're part of other countries. They're part of Turkey. They're part of Iraq. They're part of Syria. Is it just an affection for Saddam Hussein, or does it go deeper than that?
It's an affection for Saddam Hussein, definitely. An affection for an antagonistic mentality of violence and revenge. As you said rightly, the Kurds' rights has been fought for hundreds of years. The Palestinian case came after 1948, and we didn't hear much about the Palestinian people until the 1960s, which I believe was created as a result of the Cold War and the Soviet Union and the left in the world. Despite that, we see calls for Palestinian state and very little or no calls for a Kurdish state. I tell you one more thing, Laura. If you read the memoirs of Miss Bell, Gertrude Bell in Iraq, which she wrote to the minister of colonization, Churchill. Churchill was in favor of an independent Kurdish state in Iraq in 1921, and they have to twist his arm to convince him to annex Kurdistan to Iraq. He even said, if we annex Kurdistan to Iraq, we must have a different budget. And he even said it. He predicted, he has a prophecy. He said, an Arab ruler in Baghdad will use his Arab army to kill the Kurds. And that's exactly what happened. So the Kurdish case is much more profound. This is a very much existing people in history, and they have deep root in history, and they are a fundamental part of the formation of the modern Iraq in 1921. Despite that, some people the supporters of the Palestinians and the Palestinians, like Court Pink here in Washington, were against us because we're fighting Saddam. It's interesting. They became supporters of a tyrant, which is Saddam, killed millions of Iraqis for the sake of what we supposedly the Palestinian rights.
Yeah, it wasn't the first time the British have thrown people under the bus, was it? And I'm sure it won't be the last. Thank you very much indeed. Intifad Kambar, great to talk to you. Well, with me in the studio, Professor Uzi Rabi from Tel Aviv University. Just a word on what you heard.
You know, Kurds are not Arabs. That kind of a point to start with. And there is sort of an animosity and suspicious relations throughout the ages. This is kind of a deep-rooted people, thousands of years, Kurdistan. In the modern period, Kurds actually were identified in the Middle East as pro-Western and pro-Israeli, which definitely actually raised the ire of Palestinians who looked at them as kind of a Trojan horse in the Middle East. And basically, this is where we stand here. I fully agree with the, with the assertions, views, impressions that we just heard about the animosity between Arabs and Kurds, especially Palestinians and Kurds. This is kind of, one of the tenets of our ever-changing region in the Middle East. But let's wait and see. Actually, Kurds have been let down by the Americans, and they still, dream of their independence. We'll have to wait and see.
All right, Professor Rabi, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the families of some of the hostages who are still being held in Gaza have been leading thousands of people on a march through Jerusalem for this year's Gay Pride Parade. This year's event was renamed the March of the Free. Our Emily Francis joins us now from Jerusalem. Emily, what's happening?
Hi, Laura. Yep, they're capping off what has been a very powerful afternoon that began a few kilometers away in Liberty Park. You can hear now this is a finale. We've been hearing speeches. I'm going to just put the microphone here for a second. So it's a beautiful ending to what has been a mix of a very somber and heavy day, but also a day of hope. I have to say that, given the circumstances and given, again, the theme is born to be free. As you had mentioned, this was really a solidarity not only with the LGBTQ community, but also in honor of the hostages that are still in Gaza, still the main priority. It was really a show of force between Israelis from all walks of life, not necessarily everybody who has come in years past, everybody here to really support the situation and to support, obviously, the hostages that have not come home. We did hear a speech from Oded Ohana, who was the fiance of Major Sagi Golan, who was killed on October 7th defending Kibbutz Be'eri. He gave a very, very emotional speech talking about his fiance, with the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, making an amendment to allow recognition of same-sex couples when it comes to fallen soldiers. So he gave a very, very emotional speech about his late fiance and the child that they share together. So overall, a bittersweet day here in Jerusalem, but also a sense of camaraderie and a little bit more less depressing, let's put it that way, than other events. It's not the pride that we've had in the past, but definitely a show of force and a show of unity, which was quite pleasant to see.
All right, Emily, thank you very much. Emily Francis there in Jerusalem for this year's Pride March, which has been renamed March of the Free in solidarity with the hostages. Very quickly before you go, Professor Uzi Rabi, there are some political developments right now. Of course, Benny Gantz, the centrist leader, he's calling for elections. Do you think that there's a chance that might happen?
Well, I feel sorry for that, because I wish they could actually stay on unified government. This is kind of a must for Israel. Listen, when I look at the array of dangers Israel has to cope with, what is highly needed is unity. At least politicians would make kind of an effort to come together when there is a war there. Our soldiers are being killed for the defense and protection of our homeland. I don't think it's time for, election, because elections would bring in all these bad feelings, kind of a huge tense when it comes to the rhetoric. And I just think of kind of a actuality where Israel should take a decision while in an election campaign to do something of major importance, militarily or geopolitically speaking, how this is going to be actually portrayed by both opposition and coalition. I think that this is
the
not
time
the
is
time
not
for
right.
that.
Okay. Professor Uzi Rabi, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you to you for watching, and do stay with us here on I24 News. Kalev Ben-David is up with you next. Good night.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Kalev Ben David. It is day 237 of Israel at war, another day of combat and violence on multiple fronts against Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah on the Lebanon border, and Palestinian terrorists in the West Bank, and a potential new front from Iran-backed militias in Iraq. But we start focused on the ongoing battle in Rafah, Hamas's last stronghold in the Gaza Strip, sitting along the Gaza-Egypt border. The IDF today saying it has killed some 300 terrorist fighters there since the start of its Rafah offensive, along with uncovering a large cache of Hamas weapons, tunnels dug under a medical clinic and under an UNRWA facility. Fighting also taking place in North Gaza, in areas like Jabalia, Gaza City, and Zaytun. Well, falling in those battles was 21-year-old Staff Sergeant Yedidia Azugai, with the IDF saying his death raises the number of combat fatalities in Gaza to 291. Also coming from Gaza today, a video message from hostage Alexander Sasha Chupanov, 2 days after a first such recording of him was released by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Now, in that tape, Chupanov criticizes the Netanyahu government and calls for it to make a hostage deal that includes a ceasefire. As usual, we will not play the tape. We don't know the circumstances unless his family specifically gives permission to do so. Joining us in studio, we have Reserves IDF Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital, the former commander of Special Forces in the IDF, and Ambassador Yehuda Lankri. He's the former Israeli ambassador to France and the United Nations, co-founder of the Moroccan-Israel Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Doron, let's just start. As I said before, we will not show that tape of Sasha Chupanov, but again, clearly, part of the psychological war that Hamas is waging along with its ground war against Israel there in Gaza.
No question. On the other hand, of course, it's a comfort for the family to see their son alive, so we have to acknowledge that. But there's no question that it's part of the attempt to put a halt to this war in any fashion possible through those videos and through their insistence that only, as a precondition, only the halting of the war can initiate a hostage deal. So this is part of this joint effort, and this is a tough opponent in the negotiation right now.
It certainly is. And the question is, the government is facing a lot of pressure to do a hostage deal. This is an attempt to add to it. Would it have the steps of this impact on the Israeli government, on the security establishment at all? Or is, at the end of the day, these decisions have to be made independently of this kind of pressure?
I think that we have to get there to liberate the hostages and to try to find a honest solution in this situation, to give this issue the utmost priority, and to try to enter the negotiations and find the way of some compromises. I think that the Prime Minister gave instructions in this sense, and we have to do all our efforts in order to find a compromise. I think that it is for Israel a ripe moment to take a break, to get a pause in the military operation in order to facilitate the return and the liberation of the hostages. And of course, to find the adequate conditions for this operation. On one hand, to get them home, if it is needed, to stop the military operation for weeks, even months, and stay in the Gaza territory as needed in order to keep the control of the security. One good news, I think that Colonel Avital will agree with me, is that we control now the Philadelphia route.
That along the Egypt-Gaza border.
Exactly. We should have done that maybe a long time ago, but this will enable Israel to have a better control on the flow of armaments from Egypt to Hamas, and to limit his capacity of nuisance against Israel.
So that is a key step. Well, for more on this, let's go to our correspondent, Robert Swift. He joins us by phone down on the Israel-Gaza border. And as Ambassador Langley was telling us, Robert, the IDF making these advances along the Philadelphia corridor, advancing into Rafah. But at the same time, we see with what's happening in northern Gaza that even if Israel, the IDF, makes these advances, that's not the end of the fighting. It's still, it seems, in all these areas, again and again, Hamas, these other terror groups manage to regroup themselves to some degree.
I think that's absolutely the case. We've seen in the last few days the IDF making large strides in Rafah, capturing the majority of the Philadelphia corridor, moving tanks into the center of the city. But at the same time, that doesn't answer the question of what comes after this particular operation, after this bout of fighting. We've seen for ourselves just this evening that combat continues in parts of the northern Gaza Strip that the IDF said it had conquered months ago. And we've seen questions from Israel's allies, such as the US, but also questions from within the IDF itself, from the highest levels of the IDF, asking the government what happens next. And there really isn't a clear answer as to what happens next. And that does then leave open the door for an insurgency such as Hamas has launched in the north of the Gaza Strip.
All right. Well, we'll have that. As you said, a lot of questions that still have to be answered in that regard. Now, even as Israel is fighting in Gaza, is it now facing the threat of an attack from another front? This from Iranian-linked militias in Iraq. IDF air defense systems today intercepted over the Golan Heights what appears to have been a cruise missile launched from Iraq. No group has claimed credit for the strike, but over the past few months, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, that is a coalition of Iranian-backed militia groups, has claimed credit for several drone attacks on Eilat, one of them damaging a naval base there. But this is the first time those groups would have launched a missile attack on northern Israel, a potentially dangerous escalation. Well, joining us now for more is retired U.S. Army Colonel Rich Outzen, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a geopolitical consultant for Dragoman LLC. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Rich, thanks for joining us. First of all, give us a sense of the military capabilities of those Iraqi militias there. How much does Israel have to fear from them? Cruise missile is a serious weapon to successfully fire from there to northern Israel.
Well, it's good to be with you. I think the trend is worrisome. The current capabilities or technological level is not very sophisticated. And we've seen this with the slow-rolling 100 of missile and rocket attack across the Red Sea a couple of weeks back. And what we see with these groups in Iraq, against U.S. bases, by the way, where they conducted over 150 attacks in January and February, is that it's more harassment fire. They were not particularly deadly nor particularly accurate. However, as they extend in range and go from the shorter range rockets to cruise missiles and drones that have extended range, the threat that we have is that ultimately the numbers of these attacks will increase, and then you'll be facing a wave of small, cheap, and many, which it doesn't take them all to get through. They don't have to be that sophisticated. And then the communities in the north, as well as the south of Israel, will have a situation analogous to what U.S. forces faced in Iraq in January and February, which is a persistent harassment. Now, that ended when we did a precise strike in downtown Baghdad that killed 3 senior leaders of one of the groups doing this. So I think they still are sensitive to deterrent actions, but it's a worrisome trend that these groups are willing to engage in this in new territory in Israel.
Well, Rich, since you mentioned the U.S. taking that action and the fact that it still has considerable forces in Iraq and neighboring Syria, the U.S. acted strongly to prevent attacks on its forces. Would it do the same for Israel to discourage these attacks and stopping an Iranian proxy from opening yet another front on Israel?
Well, I think plausible deniability is important here, given the very tense regional situation based on the fighting in Rafah and in Gaza more generally. I think that certainly from an American perspective, it's important that Israel not do things in an overt way that will sort of raise the regional ire and upset the precarious balance, for instance, in Iraq anymore. I think what would be preferable would be for either Israel to do something that would be deterrent in a sort of non-attributable way, through an attack that it's not clearly claimed and not clearly traceable, or to have the United States do it. Now, I think the United States may actually consider that if it thinks that the escalation risk from a direct Israeli retaliation in Iraq is unacceptable. And in that case, you could probably see something like what we did to deter attacks against our own forces in February.
Right, and since you raised it, I will mention there have been reported or alleged Israeli operations within Iraq, but Israel has never claimed such a thing, and he's even denied in some cases that it has operated there. But as you say, in this case, plausible deniability. We haven't even seen, for this particular attack today, those Iranian groups, militias in Iraq claim credit for it. Rich Outzen of the Atlantic Council, thank you for joining us on I-24
Good to
News.
be with you. Thanks.
And Doronov, Israel today demonstrating its air defense system, its capability. But how much of a problem would it be if suddenly we've seen, at least we're going to a lot, we did see one of those drones launched from Iraq cause some serious damage on a naval base, IDF naval base in Eilat. How much of a problem for Israel's air defense systems would be if suddenly now it has to be deterring weapons from Iraq?
Yeah, sure, it's a problem. I mean, UAV can skip our defense aerial systems. It can happen. This time we succeeded to intercept the cruise missile or either UAVs that we did in Eilat. But as you mentioned, the UAV that really hit a naval base in Eilat. I think it was a very fine analysis, and it brings forth the point that this is a war of a coalition, and we have so many fronts, and we have to play with our coalition. And in Iraq, for sure, the U.S. supports our action, and we shouldn't act, as you said, openly, but only in a covert fashion, or use our allies to help us in this, the way they did in the 13th of April against the missile attack from the Iranian. So it's important to know that when we engage in those confrontations with the U.S., we should know that we need them in all those fronts that we are confronting.
Speaking of allies or ostensible allies, Yehuda, Prime Minister Netanyahu is giving an interview on French television today. In French, a pretty rare occurrence. France is one of those countries that at the beginning of, or shortly after October 7th, at the beginning of the conflict with Hamas, strongly supported Israel, but has shifted in a different direction now. How much can Israel, and the Prime Minister even speaking directly to the French public, influence a country like France to shift back more in the direction of supporting Israel?
As you know, France is a very important country in the European Union, and it is one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. But I think that there is a serious change in addressing the French opinion public and the French political landscape. We, as you say, felt a sense of solidarity, even a strong solidarity of President Macron at the beginning of the war. I think that he is still supportive of Israel, but has here and there some criticism, like it happens with our best friend, Joe Biden.
Yes.
But the protest in France of the pro-Palestinians and some political leaders like Mélenchon, for example, are so harsh and so harmful for Israel and for the Jewish community
in France,
that it is really very important, and I wish that our Prime Minister will perform, you say, in French, in such an effective manner that he will convince them that there are some other reasons to give support to Israel.
Well, it's going to be, that's certainly a tough task, given, as what you said, what's happening in the streets of France and also in the streets of the United States as well, we should say. And speaking of the Prime Minister, let's turn now to politics. War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz warned Prime Minister Netanyahu that he would take his National Uniparty out of the government by June 8th unless some serious planning began for the future of a post-war, post-Hamas Gaza, the so-called day after scenario. Well, that hasn't happened. So today, Gantz upped the stakes by having his National Unity Party submit a bill to dissolve the government and hold new elections, a move that does not appear to have the support needed to pass in the Knesset at this time, for sure. But is Gantz's threats to both the coalition losing him some popular support? A new poll by Channel 12 News shows that for the first time since October 7th, a larger percentage of Israelis prefer Netanyahu to Gantz as prime minister by 36 to 30%. The poll also showed national unity dropping in the number of Knesset seats it holds to losing ground to the Likud-led coalition of right-wing parties. Although we should stress an anti-Netanyahu coalition of factions which still hold a substantial lead in parliament. Doron, we often turn to as a security analyst. We forget your political career. You served in the Knesset under a party, Kadima, which center-right party, which did exactly what Gantz is threatening to do. It bolted gave Netanyahu some deadlines. It bolted the government, and unfortunately, Kadima suffered so politically from that and disappeared from the political map. Is Benny Gantz running the same risk as Kadima did?
Certainly, it's a repeat of history with the same lesson, and in some sense the same circumstances. The point on which Kadima left the coalition was the point of the drafting of the Orthodox, which is also looms in the background of this divide.
Right.
Exactly. And Kadima went into the biggest coalition ever in the history of Israel of 90 or so seats. And I remember those 4 months we were very powerful, together with Ehud Barak as Minister of Defense, and we were thinking that we can curtail Bibi to our direction. But then Bibi is a master politician, and he succeeded to shake Shaul Mofaz, the head of Kadima, out of balance. And Mofaz was forced, maybe wrongly forced.
Again, another defense minister, another former IDF chief of staff.
Exactly, paratrooper, the same story.
Same story. Is Benny Gantz going to end up to be the new Shaul Mofaz?
This is his greatest fear. Back then, we told Shaul not to leave the coalition, me and a few members. And he did, and then we moved from 28 seats to 2 seats. It's the greatest collapse of a political party in the history of Israel. And Benny Gantz have those 28 or 4 or 35 only in the polls in the last few months. So it's not even a concrete seat. So he's really much worried about such a scenario. He has to play his cards very carefully. And he forced himself through this deadline to a situation in which he might be forced to leave the coalition by the deadline that he himself set.
Right.
So this is an interesting political predicament. Yes.
Always in politics, when you give yourself a deadline by date.
Don't do that.
That's maybe in the army. That's a good thing to do. Yehuda, you've served as a diplomat, Likud governments, Labour, Kadima governments. Gantz is what we see in the polls this week by that Channel 12 poll. Is it a mistake because of the appeal of unity in the Israeli public, especially during times of national crisis? The one call that always works with the Israeli public is unity.
I believe that the polls reflect the situation of the moment when we were under the blow of the post 7 October. So Netanyahu was down and Benny Gantz was up during many, many weeks. Now, Netanyahu managed to control the situation in a way that is a kind of resurrection from the debris of the 7 October. And he's, I think, broadcasting confidence and control of the situation more and more. This translates in the last poll and give him the confidence of the majority of the public that was approached with this poll. But, that is a situation which is temporary.
Right, it's a snapshot of a time, and who knows what could happen. But one thing, good point you make, Benjamin Netanyahu, so many times people have written him off, and he's proven himself to be a master of politics and a master of the political resurrection. Perhaps even now that would be the case. All right, let's move back to the security situation. Violence intensifying in the West Bank this week, with the IDF now confirming the death of 2 soldiers, Staff Sergeants Elia Hillel and Diego Zvisha Harsaj, both 20 years old, after they were struck by a car last night while patrolling on a road that leads into the city of Nablus. Israeli troops searched the area for the suspect afterwards, but he reportedly succeeded in entering the Palestinian Authority-controlled area of Nablus, where he turned himself in there to PA security forces. Now, the ramming attack follows days of shooting incidents by Palestinian terrorists at both Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria, and also Israeli communities laying just across the Green Line outside of the West Bank. And there are some disturbing trends also going on here in the West Bank just in the last few days.
This is a major front, the West Bank. Jenin, Tulkarem, which is nearby our border, Nablus. So those areas are not under a real command and control of the PA. For sure, Jenin, in which we have a constant fighting for months, even before the 7th of October. And this is a front that all the time we have to be fearful of it exploding. And also the very touchy relationship we have with the Palestinian Authority. You just mentioned that, that the terrorist turned himself in. They didn't release it to our forces yet. It's also a sort of contention. So we'll have to see. This is a lot of tension. This front is all the time on me personally, a frightening front.
Frightening front. I will mention that in past cases where Palestinian Authority security forces have detained these suspects, in some cases they detain them for a certain period of time, and when the pressure release lets up, they basically release them. And I would have to say, given the current state of relations between the Palestinian Authority and the current Israeli government, I would not be surprised to see that scene play out. Briefly.
Yes, I would add in this aspect that we show very little consideration and respect toward the Palestinian Authority. When our governments show such a disdain toward the Palestinian Authority, you can't expect them to go after the terrorists.
Right, understood. That cooperation certainly has gone down over the past year or well before that. Now, the annual Jerusalem Pride and Tolerance Parade usually makes the news over issues related to LGBTQ rights. But this year's march had a different focus, as it was led today by family members of Israelis held hostages in Gaza in a show of solidarity. Emily Francis was at the event and filed this report.
So we are here at Independence Park, which is the end of this very long parade, a walk that took more than a half an hour. Hundreds of people have been here throughout the afternoon, starting at Liberty Park. Now this is everybody being here, taking in different people speaking on the stage. As you see right now, somebody new just took to the stage. Again, this year being the 22nd annual parade in Jerusalem, it has a different significance for obvious reasons. They have the slogan, "Born to be Free," of course, a testament to the hostages that are still in the tunnels of Gaza. But aside from that, it has been a gathering of people uniting for a common cause, which is obviously equality to LGBTQ rights, but also, of course, the rights of the hostages that have still not been brought home. We also heard from Yair Lapid, opposition leader, who spoke, as well as the fiance of one of the soldiers who died on October 7th. We had an opportunity also to speak to folks from Hapoel Jerusalem, the soccer team, which does a lot of advocacy to bring together the LGBT community with athletics. So we had a chance to speak to him as well. Take a listen to not only the people from Hapoel Jerusalem, but also representatives of the hostage families.
Hirsch Goldberg polling is our friend. That we are extremely worried about him. Actually, since October 7th, in every game, the players go to the pitch with a shirt with his face on it. And we're using our social media platforms to call for his release. And hopefully we will soon see him soon in the stands.
I think there's a consensus in Israeli society that the hostages crisis is the most urgent one and is the one that needs immediate solving. And this goes from left to right, from religious to secular. And here we have another Israeli community that approached us to embrace us and to suggest that their struggle and their actions will be a platform for us to echo our messages and our despair and our agony. And we were obviously welcoming that and embracing that. And I think there are so many similarities between the LGBTQ struggle for freedom and equality and the ability to live safely. Sadly, that resonates with the reality of the hostages' families.
Right. So again, a very hearty event of many people of all walks of life, not just members of the LGBTQ community, bringing it all together with one heart, one soul for equality and rights for all, not just LGBTQ, but also, of course, the hostages that are still not home. That's all for now from Jerusalem. Emily Francis, back to you in the studio.
Rights for all and freedom, personal freedom, the most essential of all rights. Stay with us. We are going out for a brief break, but we'll continue this special broadcast on I-24 News in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds. De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel. Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
¿23? Ya. ¿72? Ya. ¿Qué hora es? Por debajo de
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News, Israel at War, Day 237. Well, early in the broadcast, we mentioned the Iraqi militias that are just one of the multiple proxy forces that Iran has utilized to attack Israeli targets. This along with Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And now, according to Israel's Mossad, working together with European intelligence agencies, it has apparently uncovered another Iranian proxy, Iranian criminal gangs suspected of involvement in attacks on Israeli embassies in Europe since October 7th. Now, according to a statement from the Mossad, an investigation into an attempted shooting and grenade attacks aimed at Israel's embassy in Sweden, in Stockholm, revealed suspects that are linked to two crime rings operating in Europe, known as the Foxtrot and Rumba gangs, both headed by Iranian emigres. Iran operates many criminal organizations in Sweden and Europe while taking advantage of the relative advantage of each and sometimes rivalry between them, the Mossad said in a statement. Meanwhile, Iran's activities in Europe and elsewhere has not dissuaded the United Nations from a special session today honoring the memory of Iran's late president, Ibrahim Raisi, following his death last week in a helicopter crash. Here's General Assembly President Dennis Francis opening the session.
It is my sad duty to pay tribute to the memory of the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, His Excellency Saeed Ibrahim Raisa, who passed away on 19th May 2024. On behalf of the General Assembly, I should like to convey our condolences to the government and the people of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and to the bereaved family of His Excellency Saeed Ibrahim Raisa.
For more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, who's at UN headquarters in New York. You know what? Missing from that little speech there by Dennis Francis, Mike, was the common nickname of Ibrahim Raisi, the Butcher of Tehran, a name not given to him by Israelis or Americans, but by Iranians themselves.
That's correct, and it has brought up a lot of questions as to the posture of the UN and exactly how seriously it takes human rights, especially when it applies in certain parts of the world and to certain member states. I asked the spokesperson for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres today whether any UN official went across the street today outside the gates of the United Nations to the protest that was going on right across the way by those opposed to Raisi, to those calling for accountability of the Iranian regime and its human rights abuses against its own people. The spokesperson for Guterres told me that no requests were made to UN officials to meet with those protesting today. However, implicitly in that is that nobody proactively went to go meet with them either today. I also asked about the Secretary General's speech in front of the UN General Assembly today in a memorial of Ibrahim Raisi. Antonio Guterres said that he oversaw a difficult time for Iran on the regional and global stage. I said to the spokesman today that the Secretary General has had no qualms about interjecting his own interpretations about the root causes of regional and global strife, as he did in the aftermath of October 7th, laying blame at the feet for the conflict at the feet of Israel. The spokesperson told me that no context was added to today's speech because it simply served as a memorial and a tribute to Raisi, essentially saying that there wasn't the time or place to add such context. I also asked about a tweet that went out recently from Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed, who in the aftermath of Raisi's death said that she was praying to Allah for the gates of paradise to be opened to Raisi, certainly beyond the protocol of UN officials in dealing with such deaths of heads of state. The spokesman said that the tribute by the Deputy Secretary General was simply to a man and not necessarily to Raisi in general, though she gave no such tributes in the recent deaths of the heads of state of Namibia and Kuwait. The spokesman later told me that he had no such knowledge of the tweet that had actually gone out several weeks ago. I assume we'll have some follow-ups about that in the days and weeks to come. The company line from the UN is that this is simply protocol. Anytime a head of state dies, the General Assembly pays tribute. It's just the way it goes. Obviously, it's not satisfactory to many who protest the legacy of Raisi, a very ugly legacy for the Butcher of Tehran.
Right, and I believe the U.S. delegation walked out during the session, and if there is an afterlife, I'm pretty sure Ibrahim Raisi is heading to somewhere else other than paradise. Mike, stay with us, because even as the United Nations pays homage to Iran's late President Raisi, the Islamic Republic's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is reaching out to a group of protesters that he sees as allies in the fight against what the Tehran regime calls the Zionist entity, or the little Satan, namely Israel. in a series of tweets that begins with the message, "Dear university students in the United States, you are standing on the right side of history. You have now formed a branch of the resistance front and have begun an honorable struggle in the face of your government's ruthless pressure, which openly supports Zionism." Now, Khamenei went on to exhort those protesters at the U.S. universities to study the Quran, become familiar with the Quran, later on specifically saying the passages in the Quran that say, "Do not oppress or be the oppressor." Mike, I mean, the irony or hypocrisy here certainly knows no bounds, and you have to wonder what if any of those protesters on the campuses there think about getting that kind of support from a figure like Ayatollah Khamenei.
In more normal, sane times, Kalev, one would think that that wouldn't exactly be a ringing endorsement that anybody would want. Times have certainly changed, and when those on college campuses are chanting out the likes of Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around, in terms of the Houthis hijacking and shooting of ships in the Red Sea and wreaking havoc on the global economy, I don't think there's much doubt that many of those same protesters on college campuses are proud of the endorsement coming from the supreme leader of Iran today. Times have certainly changed, not so much for the better here in America in terms of the posture toward terror entities like Iran, in terms of the posture toward American foreign policy. It's a major shakeup, certainly will play a role in the upcoming elections. We're seeing it on the local level, at the state level, the national level. Going to be interesting to watch in the months to come here as those protests really start to have consequences in terms of the future here in America, especially at the electoral level here.
All right, certainly that is the case. I'm going to mention Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, who at Yeshiva University, I believe, took off condemned his alma mater, Harvard University, for the way it's handled those student protests. So we should take note of that. Mike Wagenheim in New York at the UN, thank you for that. And Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Former Ambassador to the United Nations, I mean, every time you think the UN really can't kind of sink lower, you see something like that tribute to Ibrahim Raisi, the butcher of Tehran.
It's, of course, a dubious tribute to a master terrorist. Our ambassador to the UN, the current ambassador, Gilad Erdan, had the opportunity to formulate a sharp criticism of this tribute and the tribute of the United Nations Security Council itself for Raisi. Actually, when you observe the behavior of Iran in the region, its policy. According to the Charter of the United Nations, they have no place as a member, and they should be ejected from
Iran, of course, yeah.
They have gathered all the conditions to be ejected. But as you say, that is a sad comedy, in which even the Secretary General is evocating the President of Iran and paying tribute to him. I have never seen such a situation in the UN, in the General Assembly, where many bizarre situations occur. But not every head of state who passes away is honored as they did for
right. And ironically, just as we saw the Mossad and European intelligence agencies say that Iran, working with outright criminals, threatening attacks or carrying out attacks at embassies, at these sort of what's supposed to be these sort of beacons of diplomacy.
We are not short of enemies, and we are not short of fronts. And the diplomatic fronts is a front. The Jewish communities and the embassies and our ambassadors, God forbid. I want to remind the audience that the 82 war in Lebanon started with an assassination attempt at our ambassador in London.
Right.
So we have to put a lot of emphasis, a lot of security in place in order to protect Jewish communities' institutions. delegation, but also our embassies, our Israeli representative. I think it's a front out there. We didn't see still major events in this front, and the Mossad is very active. And let's hope they succeed to prevent any such efforts.
Right. Well, sticking with diplomacy, the European nation of Slovenia has become the latest country to take moves towards official recognition of a Palestinian state. Also weighing in on Mideast politics is a much more significant global player. China says it wants to work with Arab nations to resolve hotspot issues in the Mideast and achieve long-term peace and stability. That, according to President Xi Jinping during a summit with Arab leaders in Beijing. Xi also reiterated Beijing's support for a Palestinian state as well, as it further tries to deepen its influence in this region. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more on that.
With war raging in the Middle East, China is flexing its diplomatic influence in the region. Speaking at the China-Arab States Cooperation Forum in Beijing on Thursday, Chinese President Xi Jinping called for a peace conference in the Middle East.
Since last October, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has escalated drastically, throwing people into immense suffering. War should not continue indefinitely. Justice should not be absent forever.
Addressing the leaders of Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Tunisia, along with some foreign ministers from Arab League nations, Xi reiterated China's support for the two-state solution.
China firmly supports the establishment of an independent state of Palestine that enjoys full sovereignty based on the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. It supports Palestine's full membership in the UN and supports a more broad-based, authoritative, and effective international peace conference.
China wants to present itself as an alternative to the West and a more credible partner to the region. And it hopes to achieve that by funding large infrastructure projects and deepening trade. Diplomatically, China surprised everyone last year when 3 months after the last forum, it brokered an agreement to restore diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, who was absent from this year's summit.
China and Arab countries enjoy traditional friendship and are strategic partners with mutual trust. In the first China-Arab State Summit in 2022, the two sides agreed to build a China-Arab community with a shared future in the new era. China-Arab relations have entered a new era of deepening and comprehensive development.
But critics say these summits only highlight the limits of Chinese influence in the Middle East, not its strengths. China continues to embolden Iran's destabilizing behavior, from illicit oil purchases to defending last month's missile and drone attack on Israel. Beijing hosts Hamas leaders and protects only its own vessels against Houthi threats at sea. All the while, it hopes to further challenge the U.S. and Russia's influence in the region.
I think you could describe China's relationship with Israel as ambivalent. But you could say that few countries outside of Israel's outright sworn enemies in this region have been more openly hostile to the Jewish state since October 7th than South Africa, specifically its ruling African National Congress Party. The ANC government has accused Israel of war crimes at the International Criminal Court. It's taken steps toward closing Israel's embassy there. And its foreign minister even threatened prison to South Africans with Israeli citizenship who serve in the IDF. Measures that, of course, have raised concerns among the some 50,000 members of South Africa's strong Jewish community. But this week, it is the ANC, accused of rampant corruption and failures to fix a faltering economy and deal with rising crime, that is facing judgment from voters in a national election. Now, preliminary results from yesterday show that the party of President Cyril Ramaphosa is set to lose its majority in parliament for the first time since the end of apartheid. Here's one voter expressing what seems to be a widespread feeling in South Africa.
Our political system as it is, it's not okay. Not okay in the sense that it doesn't serve its people, but then it serves those who are already in power. And that's my perspective on it. So I'm expecting a new party. I'm not going to be specific as to which party, but then maybe at least EFF, because ever since it never had a chance to rule. So we don't know what to expect from it. But then I think it's good for us to embrace change if we want change.
And joining us for more is Zev Krengel. He's the president of the South Africa Jewish Board of Deputies. He joins us from Johannesburg in South Africa. Zev, thank you for joining us. Maybe first briefly just explain to us about the results. What does that actually practically mean for the ANC?
So we as the South African Jewish community are very excited. The ANC as a party owes a lot to the South African Jewish community. We fought side by side. The majority of white South Africans in the apartheid era fought with the ANC, gave up their white privilege to literally liberate all South Africans, black and white, from apartheid. And then under Cyril Ramaphosa, he chose to really turn his back on the Jewish community, and he made one of his biggest political decisions that everything was about Palestinians and an anti-Israel policy. And the polls have shown that no one really bought his anti-Israel policy. The parties that have been affected the most have been the anti-Israel parties. The ANC, the EFF's come down, a very populist left-wing party, also very anti-Israel, and then Al-Jamaa, which is a party actually funded by the Iranians, all lost, as the Patriotic Alliance, which has been an incredibly pro-Israel and a party that believes in peace in the Middle East, has grown the biggest. The DA has done well. All the parties. So we're very excited. We really hope that Cyril now will be forced to leave office as the president. We think the ANC under his leadership has done a terrible job in our country. And we think it's a great day for democracy. I think personally, living this election has been unbelievable. I was in the peace accord in 1994, saw those massive queues on the 27th of April. And to see 30 years later that a party that's lost its way, the ANC has lost its way internationally, locally, and under President Ramaphosa really proved to be a terrible party towards Israel, towards the Jewish community. And they paid a massive price. It went from 57% in the last election, and the predictions are under 45, most probably 43%. And we look forward to seeing Cyril resigning, which any president of a liberation movement who lost power by a dramatic loss is quite exciting for South Africa.
Right. I mean, of course, I imagine the real issues there were corruption and crime, but if Ramaphosa thought that by attacking Israel he would deflect the public from those concerns, that clearly was a failure. Give us a sense. Those who know South Africa's Jewish community know it to be a strong community, a proud community, in many ways a Zionist community, but one also proud of its role in South Africa. How has it been for this past year, having to deal with what's been happening there?
So what's fascinating in South Africa is, unlike many other Western democracies, we had a government that has behaved incredibly disgustingly towards Israel and the only democracy in the Middle East. But as people of South Africa have been incredible. We've lived as proud Jews. Our universities have been pretty calm. Your average black and white Christian South African has really seen the complexities and hasn't bought Ramaphosa's obsession with his foreign minister Pandor, a converted Muslim, spending billions of taxpayers' money to try and go for the Jewish state. So we are incredibly proud of the South African people, black and white, across all races, across all religions, to stand up and say enough of corruption, enough of going for the only democracy in the Middle East. And we're looking forward to seeing change. And we had taken it personally with President Ramaphosa. He had made all his money through Jewish business people who had always helped him when he had no money and had always built him up. And he turned his back on the Jewish people of South Africa. He turned his back on Israel. And he has paid a massive political price for being obsessed with being anti-Israel without worrying about his own people. So now we hope that South Africa will come first, and the new people, he will have to do a coalition. Hopefully he won't be the president, and we will see, hopefully, in South Africa, a new dawn where the liberation movement is no more in power.
All right, Zev Krengel there from the Board of Deputies in South Africa. Some good news, I think, for that community, and good news for potentially for South Africa as a nation as a whole, and also for Israel as well. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank our guest, Ambassador Yehuda Lankry, Doron Avital, for joining us this evening. Thanks very much. Now, early in the program, we mentioned this cruise missile attack from Iraq on northern Israel, which has suffered similar rocket attacks from Lebanon as an almost hourly occurrence over the past 8 months. Well, in this report adapted from Israel's Channel 12 News, we see what a day in the life is like for the residents of northern Israel living under the threat of constant fire. Let's take a look.
Yuval, Lido, Ophir, and Ella know very well what a drone is. They can tell the difference between an anti-tank missile explosion and IDF artillery fire. After 8 months of living in the shadow of a nameless war in the north of Israel, the life they lived before October has made a dramatic turn.
I have nightmares because of sirens. When we go to Tel Aviv, I don't have bad dreams anymore. And when we come back, I have them again.
Ophir is only 6 years old. He was born in Kfar Blum, a pastoral community in the Galilee. He spent several weeks in Tel Aviv, and there, in the big city, children have better dreams.
For 3.5 months, I traveled all over the country. We've already lived in 5 different places, all with 4 children. Money-wise, it became too burdensome for us, so we decided to return home. Here is the kindergarten that has been closed for many months because it can't be secured, and it is considered the safest. As you can see, everything has remained as it was in the yard with all the toys outside.
We asked residents of the north to document their daily lives with a camera in the towns of the Upper Galilee, near the Lebanese border, where rocket, missile, or suicide drone alerts sound several times a day.
Good morning. You can hear the gunfire behind me. These are our forces. Over time, we've learned to differentiate between our shots and enemy shots. My parents were supposed to come here for Shabbat, but due to the situation, they won't be coming.
Nadav lives in Kibbutz Sde Nehemiah, one of the most popular places in the region for young couples. Few still decide to stay there, although officially the community has not been evacuated.
Here's the first siren of the day. It's in the surrounding farms. I want to say that if I seem so apathetic in this video, it's because we've gotten used to living in this abnormal situation. In theory, we should be living here in silence and calm, surrounded by nature. Now a siren has started blaring in the kibbutz while we were sitting outside. So we were minding our business, and suddenly, well, you can judge for yourself.
One of the major difficulties for those who have chosen to stay in the north is that almost all civil services are currently closed. Supermarkets are only open for a few hours a day.
I'm here in a huge supermarket in Kiryat Shmona. When the situation is good, there are some kinds of vegetables and fruits. But there are very few goods arriving, and we usually have to go to different stores to try and get what we want. Besides, everything closes at 4 p.m., so you have to run after work. But as you can see, entire shelves of food stores are empty. There's not much left to buy here. This is the state of a store that until recently was one of the best stocked, where you could find everything, until the war began. Alert, this is an alert. We have only a few seconds to take cover. We're rushing to the shelter. Fortunately, I know the way. There are really a lot of alerts today. It's not always like this. And yeah, it sounds again for the second time in less than a minute. It's impossible to go outside the basement. Look, this whole area burned just today, after rocket salvos fired this morning by Hezbollah. You can see the smoke in the sky. There's a very strong smell of smoke. And here are the landscapes of our beautiful country, or rather, what is happening today.
Today, they are firing many anti-tank missiles. We hear numerous explosions in the city of Kiryat Shmona from the kibbutz Kfar Giladi, where I am. These are big Burkan missiles falling in the city. This is our reality here. We're going to take cover to protect ourselves.
Hundreds of Israeli civilians living in the Galilee were mobilized on October 8th. Kfar Giladi is located in a strategic position from where you can see the entire region.
It's 5 a.m. We had a difficult night. Several missiles hit houses in the city of Metula. Here is the missile debris.
This is the daily life of tens of thousands of the Galilee residents, those whose communities were not evacuated or who decided to stay. These families are waiting for the Israeli leaders to decide what will happen to them next. Decisions that have been delayed for 8 months.
When people who have no idea what we are living through here every day hear us say that we live here, maybe they think we sit quietly at home and that from time to time there is a siren. We try to maintain a semblance of normality in all of this madness, but it's impossible.
And just a brief update, Israel's war cabinet is meeting this evening at IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv. This as we do see protests outside calling for the government to move ahead on a hostage deal. There was a statement released by Hamas this evening, though, saying that they will not continue to carry on the negotiations, the mediated talks that have been going on via Egypt and the U.S. and Cairo, while Israel continues what they say Hamas calls its war of aggression. That ends our broadcast for this evening, day 237 of Israel at War. You can continue to follow us, of course, on our social media sites and our website. And